Today on Leaf by Leaf, Alexander THEROUX, A Fan's Notes by Stephen Moore. I came to know of Stephen Moore through my first reading of William Gaddis's The Recognitions, a book that single-handedly deepened my expectations and changed my perspective of the way a novel could be approached. In 1982, Moore wrote a reader's guide on that book, and he would go on to produce much work on Gaddis, including the authoritative and simply titled William Gaddis, subsequently published in an expanded edition, virtually spearheading the whole discipline of Gaddis studies. Now it appears he is doing the same with the work of Alexander THEROUX, with Alexander THEROUX, A Fan's Notes. This book is published by Zerogram Press and is available now. Given Moore's background, his track record with Gaddis, and his 40-year correspondence with THEROUX, there isn't a better person for this job. Knowing as I did the oft-quoted remark that Moore wishes to be buried with his copy of Darconville's Cat clasped to his chest, I fully expected this monograph to be a saccharine hagiography, which would have been fine with me. I lapped up every review and essay in my back pages, which is sort of the capstone to his survey of the novel in his two-part series, The Alternative History of the Novel, beginnings to 1600 and then 1600 to 1800. I marveled at the labor, learning, and love expended in these three books. But not everyone fawns over Moore as I do, and not everyone is ready to lavish praise on Alexander THEROUX's work. Luckily, in this book, we get a sober, balanced treatment of THEROUX's entire repertoire, published and unpublished, and perhaps more interesting to fans and foes alike, a careful, unflinching look at THEROUX the writer. A chronology of THEROUX's pivotal life events, education, major publications, and relevant awards follows a preface where Moore informs the reader that this book brings together previously published work along with new essays without trying to harmonize them, although he does use footnotes for clarification where necessary. This lack of formal scholarly structure is by design, and Moore makes it clear that one of the goals of this book is to show his shifting opinions of THEROUX's work over time. For anyone who has read the THEROUX essays in my back pages, or has read the material in the special edition of the Review of Contemporary Fiction with Paul West and Alexander THEROUX, much material is reprinted here. This may be welcome though, because this issue of Review of Contemporary Fiction is very hard to get. And still, the strongest pieces in this book, in my opinion, are The Novelist as Critic, the original of Laura, and the Brothers THEROUX, which, along with several other pieces, are only available in this book. The introduction is the reprint of the introduction from the special RCF issue, which I believe is still the best essay to whet the appetite of would-be THEROUX readers. In Darconville's Cat and the Tradition of Learned Wit, Moore maps out THEROUX's literary lineage from Rabelais, Swift, and Sterne, and differentiates him from other writers of the learned ilk, like Sorrentino, Barth, and Pynchon. His critical prowess is on full display as he deciphers many facets of Darconville's Cat's intertextuality. He takes dense thickets of that overpacked book and demystifies them. His brief chapter on an adultery leaves one wanting more, and is mostly a list of additions that THEROUX sent Moore, and Moore included to support future THEROUX studies. But the single line, Ford catalogues and analyzes her faults, with a thoroughness not seen since Marcel trained his sights on Albertine, redeemed the brevity of the chapter. Darconville's Cat, Redux, is a short review of the book that reiterates earlier material, but also offers a handful of interesting tidbits. It seems somewhat out of place, but it does help to set up the transition from An Adultery to Laura Warholic. The original of Laura is the exposé many readers of the hulking novel will want to read. It has been noticed, of course, that something clearly went awry in the publication process with that book. It's littered with misspellings, uncorrected syntax, and anachronisms. Yet Stephen Moore is listed on the copyright page as the copy editor. Being familiar with Moore's attention to detail, this was out of character. This chapter then will directly answer the question of what went wrong. It should be noticed that the editing of Laura Warholic was taken on gratis by Stephen Moore, but his patience was tried and burnt to the point where he had to step away from the project. Thus, his frayed nerves are very apparent in the essay, but the dutiful inclusion of supporting evidence for all of his claims tempers the admittedly skewed perspective. Moore is among the few who can speak of what went on during the publication process of Laura Warholic. To drive his points home, he includes many examples of Theroux's penchant for continuing to add throughout the entire process, expanding the work over and over, and points out why this damaged the novel's reception upon its release. A 6-page list of errata is appended to the essay. In addition to the story behind the turbulent journey to the printers, the story behind the story of Laura Warholic is pieced together in a feat of literary sleuthing, rivaled only by the detective work on display in his later essay, The Brothers Theroux. Moore uses letters, emails, photographs, telephone calls, and Theroux's fiction and poetry to piece together a familiar story. Theroux dated a girl for a while, it ended badly, and he wrote a novel about it. Some photos of Laura Markley herself are included, which, looking at them, made me feel kind of bad. It almost made me feel implicated or complicit in the bullying of her literary avatar. But Moore offers an email from her ex-boyfriend that makes it clear that Theroux starts with real people as models, and then continues to add to them until they go even beyond caricature and they're unrecognizable. One thing that will become very clear about Theroux reading this book is that he is sitting on a mountain of unpublished manuscripts, essay collections, story collections, poetry collections, novels. Like William T. Vollmann, Alexander Theroux works on his stuff simultaneously. Of everything included in this reservoir, the collected stories have come the closest to being published. Jim Gower of Zerogram Press even offered to publish it, but Theroux declined. It seems that unless the biggest publishing house with the biggest checkbook comes along, we may not see these books come to fruition. At the very least then, Moore lists all of the stories in the manuscript and annotates each of them. Though most known for his enigmatic Darkenville's Cat, Theroux has been writing poetry all of his life and takes the art of his poetry very seriously. In Poems on Sundry Occasions, we find that in addition to the nearly 1,000 poems between the Dalkey Archive publication of Lollipop Trollops and the Fantagraphics publication of the collected poems, there are hundreds more in manuscript. Moore makes it clear that Moore's specialization is in prose fiction, so he uses the latest edition of Best American Poetry as a benchmark to evaluate Theroux's poems. Years ago, Moore asked Theroux to submit an essay, The Novelist, as critic, but it did not materialize. Thankfully, we do have the sublime Theroux metaphrasts, but as Moore believes that novelists make better critics than literary critics and book reviewers themselves, and I agree, he was hoping to get a more up-to-date stance from Theroux. In lieu of that, in this chapter, Moore takes a magnifying glass to every single book review, essay, and introduction that Theroux has written in order to extract literary standards and preferences that are useful in evaluating his own fiction. In the chapter Books of Curious Facts, Moore records his thoughts on what he believes is Theroux's weakest part of the Therouxian canon, but is also the largest part. These books include Primary Colors, Secondary Colors, The Grammar of Rock, Estonia, and Einstein's Beats, and unpublished material in the same vein. Though the books display Theroux's considerable learning, voracious appetite for details, and diligent lifelong note-taking habits, they lack a literary structure and are essentially trivia books, which for Moore may be the most inconsequential genre there is. The Brothers Theroux, however, is a 36-page narrative of Alexander's contentious relationship with financially successful novelist Paul Theroux. This essay expands and updates dynamics that were pointed out in James Atlas's 1978 article, The THEROUX Family Arsenal. Alexander takes swipes at his brother in every published novel and in several stories and poems, not to mention book reviews and essays. On the other hand, Moore also mines all of Paul Theroux's books and his son Marcel's book for thinly veiled representations of Alex. And amusingly, in a letter from Laura Markley, she says, "I don't know who has the bigger ego, Alex or Paul. It's a close race." The appendix includes a reprint of the RCF issue's interview between Moore and Theroux, as well as details on the unfinished novel Herbert Head, which Theroux has been working on since about the 60s. I would be first in line to read it. And also a publication checklist. One thing I love about Moore is his penchant for the punctilious publication checklist, as exemplified with his bibliographies for Sherry Martinelli and Alexander Theroux on his personal website. This is especially useful for a writer like Alexander Theroux, whose massive output spans over half a century. Moore divides these into books and pamphlets, contributions to books and pamphlets, contributions to periodicals, which is the largest part, translations, and interviews. And the contributions to periodicals are further subdivided into book review, drama, essay, fiction, and poetry. Going a step further, all editions of the publications are listed where applicable. Alexander Theroux, A Fan's Notes by Stephen Moore, is passionate, intelligent, and unexpectedly honest. A responsible scholar, Moore's personal opinions and observations are always supported with convincing detail. The writer once again showcases his ability to convey an encyclopedic knowledge of literature and the publishing industry in clear, engaging prose. For anyone interested in the eccentric, cantankerous, but, well, literary genius Alexander Theroux, this is the best book to get. In fact, it's currently the only book to get. And as with Moore on Gaddis, I hope that this book pioneers many years of Theroux studies until eventually New York Review of Books reissues Darkenville's Cat.